The castra Ferrum dreadnought was in use during the Great Crusade and was thought to be phased out, but during the Horus heresy, of course, desperate times called for desperate measures, and the castra Ferrums were put back into production and used again. Despite their more primitive design, they still proved to be formidable assets on the battlefield. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we're covering the castra Ferrum dreadnought in Horus heresy, though I will just be calling it the box knot from here on out, or box dreadnought. So the castra Ferrum dreadnought talon comes in at 125 points. It moves 6 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 5, strength 6 and toughness 6, with 5 wounds, initiative 2, 3 attacks, leadership 9, and 2+ save. So, for 50 points less than a Contemptor, you do get significantly worse stats. However, these stats are still quite good, except for the initiative, which is unusually bad. The unit count is just 1 dreadnought. It does have the heavy keyword, so it cannot run, and it rerolls saves against template weapons. In terms of war gear, it comes standard with the Gravis Power Fist with inbuilt combi bolter, which the Power Fist is strength 9, AP 2, and brutal 3, same as the Contemptor, which is interesting. And the combi bolter itself is 24 inch range with strength 4, AP 5, rapid fire, and twin linked, decent enough for squishing some militia or something like that. The twin linked Gravis bolt cannon is 36 inch range, strength 5, AP 4, and heavy 6. It does have a ferromantic deflector, which is a slight downgrade from the antomantic deflector that most dreadnoughts have. It still has a 5+ invuln, so it is very tough, but instant death, instead of being converted into D3 wounds, inflicts 3 wounds to this model. And when this model dies, all models within D6 take an automatic strength 6 AP- hit. In terms of special rules, it has Legionis Astartes X, Dreadnought Talon, which means you deploy all of the dreadnoughts in a unit coherency at deployment, but from then on they are treated as different units. And as a dreadnought, it gains Fearless, so it'll never fail morale. It can move and shoot heavy weapons and charge afterwards. And also, it cannot be joined by anything that doesn't have the dreadnought keyword. And successful Fleshbane and poison models must be poison wounds must be rerolled, and it can shoot everything when shooting, including reactions. So for 125 points, this is honestly still a very beefy stat line despite its slightly diminutive initiative, which means it won't excel in melee against infantry. However, it still hits and shoots very accurately and is still very tough for the cost, which is very good, and is another way to get more dreadnoughts on the board, and of course I quite like the box knot, so I'm glad to see that it's actually pretty good in this game, in my opinion. Moving on, we have all the weapon options, which this guy does have a good amount of, and you can run this guy in the Mortis configuration with both of them, but the first thing is you can include up to 2 extra dreadnoughts for 125 points per model, of course, and then any of them may swap out their Gravis Bolt Cannon or Power Fist and Combi Bolter for any of the following. The Gravis Bolt Cannon is the same as what I said in the previous slide. The Multi-Melta is 24 inch range with strength 8, AP 1, heavy 1, armor bane Melta, and twin linked, so very solid anti-tank, but for 20 points it's a little pricey. The Gravis Auto Cannon is 48 inch range, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 3, running 6+, twin linked for 10 points each. The Gravis Plasma Cannon is 36 inch range, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 1, large blast 5, breaching 4+, and gets hot for 10 points. The Flamestorm Cannon is strength 6, AP 4, heavy 1, torrent 18 inches, and 15 points each. Torrent 18 means you get to place the narrow end of your template anywhere within 18 inches, and the only restriction is that the wide end of the template cannot end closer to the model than the narrow end. The Gravis Missile Launcher is 10 points, and it has 2 modes. Frag, which is 48 inch range, strength 4, AP 6, heavy 1, blast 5 inches, and pinning. And the Crack profile is 48 inch range with strength 8, AP 3, and heavy 2. The Gravis Las Cannon is 48 inch range, strength 9, AP 2, heavy 2, and sunder. And the Gravis Power Fist with inbuilt Combi Bolter is free, and I already explained that. And the Chain Fist does have the same underslung Combi Bolter, but it is a slightly side-gridded profile to strength 10, so very nice. AP 2, Armor Bane Melee, Murder Strikes 5+, which means on a 5+, you get instant death, and Armor Bane, of course, means you roll 2 Armor Pen dice in melee. Then you can swap out either or any of your inbuilt combi bolters with either a heavy flamer or melta gun, which the heavy flamer is template, strength 5, AP 4 for 5 points, and the melta gun is 12 inch range, strength 8, AP 1, assault 1, and armor bane melta for 15 points, which means when you get close, you of course roll 2 armor pen dice. So these weapons are all pretty fairly priced in my opinion, though I think a standout is the Gravis Missile Launcher. It is significantly better than your standard missile launcher for a very similar price at that matter. Blast 5 inches is really good for pinning, because it means you're more likely to force that pinning test onto any target, and having 2 shots on your crack mode is actually pretty nice, which makes the rocket launcher less just sort of mediocre general purpose and upgrades it to actually good general purpose. The las cannon is also great, even though it is expensive at 20 points. Having Sunder on a big heavy 2 weapon is very good, it means you're more likely to pierce armor, and the classic missile and las cannon build is definitely one I would consider, but honestly, if you wanted to go double Gravis missile launcher, I'd understand, mainly because it looks funny, but also because the Gravis missile launcher is quite good. Some other standouts, in my opinion, are the plasma cannon or the auto cannon, which are both very general purpose, though I'd lean towards the plasma cannon personally, just for the easier access to breaching, which is very helpful for dealing with things like Terminators, though gets hot is unfortunate. Moving on, we have to cover the rest of the options. Any of them may take a Havoc launcher, which is 48-inch range, strength 5, AP 5, heavy 1, blast 3, and twin linked. A fine enough upgrade if you just need some extra anti-infantry firepower. Or it can take a helical targeting array, which means you can activate it at the start of any of your turns or start of the battle if you're going second. The model may not move or run or use any other reaction except Overwatch and Interceptor. Controlling player may choose to use Skyfire when using its weapons, so very good against planes. And no model may take a damage mitigation roll provided by Shrouded when attacked by this model, so you bypass Shrouded, which is effectively Feel No Pain. When this model uses the Interceptor reaction, it doesn't cost a point of your reaction allotment, and this does allow you to bypass the 3 reactions in a phase, but not more than 1 reaction per model. The Searchlight is 5 points, and it just allows you to ignore night fighting, and one model hit by your attacks is also, or one unit hit by your attacks is also revealed for all other friendly models, so they can ignore night fighting. Legion, one of the talons of one Dreadnought can take a Dreadnought drop pod as a designated transport. Doesn't take up a Force Org slot, though does count as an elite for all other rules purposes. This is something I wouldn't really consider, as I'd say the castra Ferrum generally wants to either use its melee, which you can't charge out of a drop pod, and it's better off shooting at range with longer range weapons instead of trying to use something like multi-meltas, in my opinion. Moving on, we have to cover the section on all the legions. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's actually the buff options up next. Tech Marines can heal up Dreadnoughts on a 5+, and given the castra Ferrum likes to be either more of a countercharge threat or a gun turret, Tech Marine just sitting next to him giving the occasional Battlesmith isn't that unreasonable. But I would make sure you're buying the Tech Marine for something else, as Tech Marines are very valuable, and the castra Ferrum is very attractive for how cheap it is. So it might be slight overinvestment to bring a Tech Marine, when you could just bring a second Dreadnought if you account for the fact that the Tech Marine has to be attached to a unit. The cheapest you're going to get that for is probably about the same price as just another Dreadnought, which would definitely be more helpful in my opinion. But Tech Marines are very good for a lot of reasons, not just healing vehicles, of course. We'll do a video on Tech Marines probably after this little Dreadnought series I'm doing, and then we'll move on from this section. And now, without further ado, it is time to get into the Legion section. I have reformatted this, so it should be a little quicker to get through, just ever so slightly. It's a little more evenly dispersed across all the different sections. So, of course, we're starting off with Loyalists, as we always do. Dark Angels, in my opinion, Dreadwing is the most useful here, as it means plasma weapons are -1 to wound against you, and since this guy's toughness 6, that is very useful. White Scars gives you +1 move, which is excellent no matter how you're using him. Obviously, because he only moves 6, so moving 7 brings him up to standard Marine movement. Space Wolves gives you +1 weapon skill on the charge, which is mainly useful for making things like Veterans or other Dreadnoughts much less effective in combat against you, which is definitely really nice, given its poor initiative. Imperial Fist gives you +1 to hit with things like autocannons or the bolt cannons, which is nice, but relatively niche given its high ballistic skill already. Blood Angels gives you +1 to wound, which is mainly useful in Dreadnought v Dreadnought, which is some of the most important combats in the game. But this guy probably isn't your best opportunity for that, given how low his initiative is. But if you have something like a conversion beamer nearby, you could blind the Dread potentially and charge in, and this guy would destroy them in a huge positive points trade for yourself. Not that I think you need to break things down into, how many points am I getting for this and this, but it's just something to keep in mind. If this guy kills a Leviathan, for example, then he's really made back his points value, though it would be quite difficult to facilitate that. Moving on, we have the next section of Loyalists, starting off with the Iron Hands. And the Iron Hands, of course, offer -1 to wound at shooting, which is great because Plasma, Las Cannons, and Meltas all really tear this guy up, so making them slightly less effective is very handy. And Autocannons are another one worth mentioning given their strength 7. The Ultramarines, since this guy already hits on 2s, he's great for setting off your friendlies nearby to get their +1 to hit. And since a lot of his weapons are pretty long range, he should be able to be a good marker unit if you have, say, a unit of, just for example, a heavy support squad. You could, hit someone for that +1 to hit for them, and then they open up on them. And then Salamanders, in a lot of ways, is just kind of worse Iron Hands, but that's not a bad thing in this case, because Plasma Melta and Volkite could all tear through this guy very fast, so having -1 to wound against them is very good. And then Raven Guard, of course, since this guy's a Dreadnought, he gets the Talons special rule, which means when he charges, he gets to reroll 1s to wound, which is great. As against most targets, you're already wounding on 2s in melee, and this guy, unless supported, generally doesn't want to be boxing other Dreadnoughts, unless it's like a Deredeo, in which case this guy will rip that thing in half without an issue. But, a Contemptor or a Leviathan, unless they're full ranged builds, this guy's going to be a little out of his depth there, just because of his low initiative. Moving on, we're onto the traitor section of the legions, starting off, of course, with the Emperor's Children. Now, the Emperor's Children give you +1 initiative on the charge, is usually an absolutely excellent buff, but going from initiative 2 to 3 makes, I can't even think of an area where that would make difference, maybe against something like Solar Auxilia, but you'll already be stomping them, so it doesn't really matter. Iron Warriors get +1 to strength when shooting dreads and automata, or vehicles, which is great because not only will the las cannons appreciate it, the missile launcher will really appreciate it, making it a significantly more effective weapon when it's already quite good. Night Lords, of course, give you +1 to wound when you outnumber someone or are pinning them, which isn't the most handy, given he wounds infantry on a 2+, and most other units can't fall back or be pinned. But the Gravis Missile Launcher gives you that big 5-inch blast of pinning, which could be very useful for other units to hit them with that rocket launcher to likely force a pinning test, and then other units to charge in, and that's, of course, very cheap, given how cheap the Gravis Missile Launcher is. World Eviseers give you +1 to attack with his +1 attacks with his melee on the charge. It's very good so long as he survives long enough to use it. If he's facing a lot of, say, power mauls, that's not necessarily guaranteed, or something like Paragon Blades, for example. But against vehicles and stuff, it'd be absolutely instrumental just to make sure that whatever you're fighting dies. Next, we have to cover the next section of Traitor Legions, of course. So first up is the Death Guard, which allow you to ignore terrain in your own deployment, or ignore slowing down, effectively. It's useful, so this guy can deploy somewhere that's very safe, make sure he's got cover, and then he can just kind of run through it, or waddle through it, I suppose, completely safe. Thousand Suns, these guys don't get Prospering Arcana, so not much here for him specifically. Sons of Horus, it's pretty nice, as Thunderhammers can destroy Dreadnoughts very fast, so instead of them instant killing this guy, effectively, not actually, it would have them wounding him on 3s instead of 2s, which can be very handy to either tie up a unit of, just Steorins for one more turn, or just, in general, keep a unit tied up for a little longer. Word Bearers, Dreads can't fail morale, and winning combats by 1 wound is pretty niche, but, I guess it still has its uses. And then finally we have the Alpha Legion, which is good if you're using a ranged dread, as it means enemies have to get closer to you. Melter range becomes 4 inches, rapid fire range for bolters becomes 10 inches, so it's a lot harder to just chip him down with close range firepower. And even things, like multi-meltas would have to get closer. Everything has to get closer to you, which could eke out an extra round of shooting. Very handy. Moving on, we have the direct competitor to this guy, which is, of course, his direct successor, lore-wise at least, and that's the Contemptor. If you have the points to upgrade to a Contemptor, it's hard to argue against it just because of the overall better stats of the Contemptor. But being 50 points cheaper, if you just want ranged firepower, the castra Ferrum doesn't do anything worse than what a Contemptor does. In fact, in some cases, you could argue that some of its weapons are slightly better, mainly just the missile launcher. And once you upgrade this guy to, have all those weapons, he's still going to be cheaper than a Contemptor. And again, his unique weapons, the Gravis Missile Launcher, is pretty good, in my opinion. Just because missile launchers in general are the jack-of-all-trades weapons, and this is a buffed missile launcher, so better against armor, better against infantry with that big 5-inch blast. And as I mentioned, having 2 cracks is exceptional. Though for something that's more dedicated melee, I'd still say the Contemptor's worth the upgrade, but again, a dedicated melee castra Ferrum, or box knot, whatever you want to call it, is only, 130 points. 135 points, which is still 40 points cheaper than a Dreadnought Contemptor. And so again, if you just need to save points, this guy will still get the job done. Don't get it wrong. So these two guys, well, not mutually exclusive. It's usually you can start with a castra Ferrum if you have the points, upgrade into a Contemptor. That's just my general rule of thumb. Or you could run both because box knots are awesome. I love them. I'd love to run some. So the castra Ferrum, I know I said I was going to call it box knot. I'm just going to call it that. Is the smallest of the dreads, and its stats are the flimsiest. But it's so cheap that it doesn't matter. And its stats are still very good. You know, toughness 6 makes him immune to a lot of weapons. And just kitting him out with some ranged weapons, you know, a rocket launcher, las cannon, and a helical targeting array is 165 points. That can't be pinned, you know, it can't fail morale or anything like that, and actually does pretty good anti-tank damage. If you wanted to, you could upgrade that rocket launcher to a second las cannon to give up the pinning for more anti-tank firepower, and you're still only 175 points in. If you wanted to go for something that's maybe more for clearing hordes, the dual flame storms would definitely come into their own, especially in like Zone Mortalis, where flame storms really excel. And it's just fun because Torrent is a fun rule. And his raw melee stats aren't bad, it's just held back by his poor initiative, which means I think he's better off suited as a mixed threat vehicle hunter. So bring something like the missile launcher to soften targets and pin any infantry that gets close, and a chain fist, and charge into whatever vehicle you can, because he still has a solid chance of just destroying something like a Land Raider, which for the points is exceptional. If you think you'll be facing massed Power Fists or Thunder Hammers, you can bring the Power Fist, or the just Gravis Power Fist. Generally that's just my rule of thumb. Most of the time the Chain Fist is better suited for his stats, but if there's a lot of those Initiative 1 weapons, then bring a Power Fist, it's cheaper. He's not the flashiest dread, but he's a favorite. I've been Spoons Rattling, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.